In part 1 of our study of Job, chapters 25 through 31, before I was interrupted and had to turn off the video, we looked at Bildad's final question to Job. In chapter 25, he asks in verse 4, how can a man be righteous before God? In chapter 26, Job goes on to prove that a man cannot, on his own, be righteous before God because God is simply too powerful. God has conquered the forces of chaos. A man cannot stand up to God. In chapter 27, Job begins his final taunt of God. He begins by stating that God has been unjust and unrighteous towards him, being Job, but while there is still life left in him, Job says he will not deny his integrity. He will not give up. He will fight on to prove he is still a righteous man. He then restates his friend's misguided belief in retribution theology, that God rewards the good, God does harm to the wicked. And he shows them how foolish and meaningless their talk is. He then goes on in chapter 28 to show them where the only place a person can find wisdom in this life is. The only place we can know wisdom is through life experience. If you cannot find wisdom by experiencing wisdom, then you're out of luck, because only God knows where wisdom lives. And God's not about to share that with a mere mortal. In chapter 29, Job goes on to show that he really has done a lot of good. His friends have called him a monster. They've told him how awful of a person he is. They've accused him of many, many crimes. And in chapter 29, he goes on to show just how upright he really was. He rescued the poor. He helped the widows. He was the eyes to the blind, the feet to the lame. He broke the fangs of the wicked. He snatched victims from their teeth. In other words, he says, I've actually acted better than God has towards me. He goes on and he says, but what have I accomplished? To what avail for being an upright man? Where's my community? Where's my friends? Where's my family? Where is God? He says, they've all abandoned me. At the beginning of chapter 30, he says, the people that used to look up to me, they now mock me. Kind of just like you, all three. You came and you tried to be comforters, and all you did was laugh at me. All you did was point the finger. They make songs of mockery towards Job. And in verse 9, he says he's become a byword towards them. He's become an example to his community, an example of what happens to a wicked man who really isn't wicked at all. We pick up now with verse 10. Job says, my community detests me. They keep their distance from me. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. And now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, God has reduced me to such a pitiful mess that I cannot help others at this time. And so they throw off restraint in my presence. On my right, the tribe attacks. They lay snares at my feet. They build their siege ramps all against me. They break up my road. They succeed in destroying me without anyone helping them. They advance as though a gaping breach amid the ruins, and they come in rolling. Terrors overwhelm me, and my dignity is driven away by the wind and by their songs of mockery. My safety vanishes like a cloud. In other words, Job has been reduced to the status of the poor that he once tried to help. Now Job can actually relate through experience what those who have found themselves in similar situations go through. He says, my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment. And that's not necessarily a good thing in Job's case. He throws me into the mud, Job says in verse 19, he being God. And I am reduced to dust and ashes. And so Job says in verse 20, I cry out to God. Now, previously, he said the wicked never cry out to God. And Job shows, he proves he is an upright, righteous man because he cries out to God. He says, I cry out to you, oh God, but you don't answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you attack me. Job says, I've cried out to you, God, and God, you've responded as a bully. You impress your power upon me. This is not a God of righteousness. Why are you doing this? Speak up, God. Many of us feel the same way that Job does at times in our lives. We've been hurt. We've been attacked. Our character has been slandered. We've experienced tremendous loss of family and friends, loss of property. Our social standing is in question. All that we knew is thrown out the window. And we feel this way deep down. If we're going to be truly honest, we feel this way. We say, God, why? God, I cry out to you. And God is silent. We feel like God is abusing us in his silence. He says, in verse 22, Job says, you, God, you snatched me up and you drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. I know you will bring me down to death, to the place appointed for all living. I know that. I'm not going to give up. And I know that I will fight until my last breath, that you will give me over to death. For surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries for help in his distress. Basically, Job says, if you see someone hurting, do you go and you kick them in the side? Do you push them back in the mud when they're trying to climb out? No, you offer a helping hand. But guess what, God? I've been in distress. I've cried out to you, and what have you done to me? You've kicked me where the sun doesn't shine. You've pushed me back down. I have not wept have I not wept for those in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? So where are you, God? Do you weep for me? Do you grieve for me? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came the darkness. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help, but guess what? God doesn't answer. I have become a brother of jackals and a companion for owls. My skin grows black and peals. My body burns with fever. My harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the sound of wailing. And yet God has not shown up. In chapter 31, Job begins to introduce a number of cultural curses upon himself to prove, once again, he is in the right. He is an upright person who has not deserved the suffering he is experiencing. Chapter 31 is the most blatant, direct challenge that Job offers to God. He begins and he says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a girl. For what is a man's lot from God above, his heritage from the Almighty on high? Is it not ruin for the wicked, disaster for those who do wrong? Well, that's what Job's three friends think, and that's what actually Job started out believing. Does he not see my ways and count my every steps? Well, yes, God does. Problem is, God hasn't responded. So now Job says, verse 5, if I have walked in falsehood, or my foot has hurried after in deceit, then let God weigh me in honest scales, and he will know that I am blameless. If I've done this, then God show up, and I'll prove I'm right. Verse 7, if my steps have turned from the path, if my heart has been led by my eyes, or my hands have been defiled, then let others eat what I have sown, and may my crops be uprooted. Job is following an honor code for the righteous. And he's saying, if I've broken this code, well then I deserve what has happened. Verse 9, if my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then may my wife and be another man's, may she grind another man's grain, and may other men sleep with her. But guess what? I've not done so, and my wife is still with me. For that would have been shameful, a sin to be judged. But Job didn't do it, so he shouldn't be judged. It is a fire that burns to Abaddon the destroyer, the ruler of the abyss. It would have uprooted my harvest. If, verse 13, if I have denied justice to my servants when they had a grievance against me, well, what will I do when God confronts me? What will I answer when called to account? But Job has not done so, and so he can respond to God. I didn't do it! Did not he who made me in the womb make my servants as well? Did not the same one who formed us both within our mothers make us? Yes. So I've treated them fairly. Verse 16, if I have denied the desires of the poor, or let the eyes of the widow grow weary, if I have kept my bread to myself, not sharing it with the fatherless, well, then I deserve to suffer in a heap of ashes. But you know what? But from my youth, I reared him as I would a father. I took care of the fatherless. I was a father to them. And from my birth, I guided the widow. So guess what, God? I don't deserve this. Job is arguing that he has lived the honor code of the righteous. He does not deserve to experience any of the curses that would come from breaking such an honor code. If I have seen anyone perishing for lack of clothing, or a needy man without a garment, and his heart did not bless me for warming him with the fleece from my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, knowing that I had influence in court, then let my arm fall from the shoulder, let it be broken off at the joint. For I dreaded destruction from God, and from fear of his splendor I could not do such things. Job says, God, I've been so afraid of you that I made sure never to break this honor code. He's so confident in himself. He's willing to call down all these curses upon himself. Verse 24, if I have put my trust in gold, or said to the pure gold, you are my security, if I have rejoiced over my great wealth, the fortune my hands had gained, if I have regarded the sun in its radiance, or the moon moving in splendor, so that my heart was secretly enticed and my hand offered them a kiss of homage, then these things would be sins to be judged. For I would have been unfaithful to God on high. Even though Job is taunting God, as part of that taunt, Job is saying, God, I have remained faithful to you. So why haven't you been faithful back to me? Verse 29, if I have rejoiced at my enemy's misfortune or gloated over the trouble that came to him, I have not allowed my mouth to sin by invoking a curse against his life. What did Job's friends do in all of their arguments? Basically, they cursed Job. Job says, you know what? I have never done that to you or to anyone else. In verse 31, if the men of my household had ever said, who has not had his fill of Job's meat, but no stranger had spent the night in the street, for my door was always open to the traveler. If I have concealed my sin as men do by hiding my guilt in my heart, because I so feared the crowd and so dreaded the contempt of the clans that I kept silent and would not go outside, If I had done that, then I deserve to go to the grave as a wicked man. Chapter 31, verse 35 is another important verse. Put a star by it. Once again, underline it, highlight it, circle it. Job says, oh, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. He says, I'm ready to put it in writing. I'm ready to take it to the bank that I haven't done anything wrong. He says, let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put his indictment in writing. Job is certain that if God were to respond in kind, God would be the loser, the liar, and the unjust monster. Many of us may look at this chapter and think, How can Job be so confident? Are not his words arrogant? And yet, once again, God himself says that Job is the one who speaks correctly. These are not the words of an arrogant man. These are the words of an upright man of integrity. Verse 36, Job says, "Surely I would wear it on my shoulder. If God were to show up and put his charges against me in writing, I'd wear them on my shoulder. Because you know what? There would be no charges. I didn't do anything wrong. I'd put them on like a crown to show everyone God cannot accuse me of doing wrong. I would give him an account of my every step. Like a prince, I would reproach him. If my land cries out against me and all its furrows are wet with tears." Once again, he's calling down curses upon himself. He says, "If I have devoured its yield without payment or broken the spirit of its tenants, if I've done even harm to the land, then let the earth itself, let the briars come up instead of wheat and the weeds instead of barley." And then it says, the words of Job are ended. Job says, "All right, God, I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I'm slapping you, God, in the face with a glove. I've put the challenge down. I've called down curses upon myself because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you were to come down, God, you would find me innocent. I know I wouldn't be able to stand in your awesome chaos-conquering presence. You would simply push me back down, God, into the dust. But I'm waiting. What are you going to do, God?" Every reader of Job would now expect God to respond. Because every time in the Bible, when God is challenged, God will not let that challenge go unanswered. How does God respond? You'll have to keep watching to find out. God bless.